The first time I smelled it, I thought something had died. Not a terrible smell. Just that damp, heavy smell that hangs in the air when a room has stayed closed for too long. The kind of smell people try to cover with candles, air fresheners, or one of those little plug-in gadgets that promise to make your house smell like a mountain after a rainstorm. I opened the basement door, took one step down, and immediately knew something wasn't right. The room looked clean. The floor was dry. Nothing was leaking. Yet the air felt heavy. If you've ever walked into a basement or storage room, or even a closet and thought, something smells old, you know exactly what I'm talking about. At the time, I wasn't born into this way of life. I had married into an Amish family, and like most people, I assumed there had to be a machine that fixed every problem. A humid room, buy a dehumidifier.
Bad smell, buy an air freshener. Mold, buy another bottle. That was how I thought. My father-in-law thought differently.
He walked into that basement, stood there for a few seconds without saying a word, then smiled. Not because he liked the smell, because he already knew it caused it. At the time, I thought those were the same thing. They aren't. That simple sentence changed the way I looked at houses forever. Stay with me, because before this video is over, I'm going to show you the $4 trick my father-in-law kept in the corner of every damp room he owned. But if I showed it to you now, without explaining why it works, most people would use it the wrong way, become disappointed, and tell everyone it doesn't work. The trick isn't to the bucket. The trick is understanding moisture. You see, most people don't notice moisture. They notice mold. They notice peeling paint, warped wood, a musty smell, rust on tools, fogged windows. But by the time you notice those things, the moisture has already been there for weeks, sometimes months. Moisture is quiet. It doesn't knock on the door. It doesn't announce itself. My father-in-law never waited for that day. He watched for moisture long before it became mold. That's one of the biggest differences I noticed after marrying into an Amish family. They didn't spend much time fixing disasters. They spent most of their time preventing them. One Saturday morning, I found him carrying a white plastic bucket toward the basement. No extension cord, no electric machine, no humming fan, just a bucket. I remember thinking, there's no way that bucket is going to solve anything. He set it in a corner, put the lid on loosely, and walked away. That was it. No buttons, no switches, no electricity. Just a bucket sitting quietly in the corner. 3 days later, I walked back into that basement. The smell was different. Actually, it was almost gone. The air felt lighter, not dry like desert air, just comfortable. I looked at the bucket. Nothing seemed different. I picked it up. It was heavier. I took the lid off. There was water sitting in the bottom, real water. I remember staring at it longer than I'd like to admit, because nobody had poured water into that bucket. The room had. That's when my father-in-law explained something I should have understood years earlier. Air is like a sponge. Sometimes it holds very little water. Sometimes it holds a great deal. When warm, damp air enters a cool basement, that moisture has to go somewhere. Sometimes it lands on pipes, sometimes on concrete walls, sometimes inside wooden shelves, sometimes on the backs of cardboard boxes, and eventually it creates the perfect home for mold. Most people fight mold. My father-in-law fought moisture, because if moisture never stays, mold never gets the invitation. That bucket wasn't magic. It simply contained moisture-absorbing crystals. Today, most hardware stores sell them for just a few dollars. You'll find them in tubs, refill bags, or hanging containers. Many are made from calcium chloride, a material that naturally pulls moisture from the surrounding air. As the crystals absorb water vapor, they slowly dissolve, leaving liquid in the bottom of the container. That's the water I saw. The room wasn't leaking. The air was. That surprised me, because I'd spent years thinking damp air was just something you lived with. Turns out you don't have to. Now here's where most people make the mistake. They see a bucket like this and think it replaces a dehumidifier. It doesn't. If you have a large basement with constant water intrusion, active leaks, or serious humidity problems, you need to solve those issues first. No bucket can replace fixing a leaking foundation or a broken pipe. My father-in-law would have been the first person to tell you that. That bucket wasn't there to solve flooding. It was there to quietly remove remove everyday moisture before everyday moisture became an expensive problem. That's why he kept them in small enclosed places. The basement pantry, the tool shed, storage closets, the room where winter boots dried, even inside an old wooden cabinet where important papers were stored. Not because those rooms looked wet, because those rooms quietly collected moisture. That lesson stayed with me. Most expensive problems don't begin with a disaster. They begin with conditions, and conditions are much easier to change than disasters. The funny thing is, after a few weeks, I started checking that bucket without even thinking about it. Every time I emptied the collected water, I wondered if all of this would have stayed in the room, where would it have gone? The answer wasn't comforting. Into the walls, into the wood smell, into the mold, into the repair bill. And that's when I realized something. The bucket wasn't saving water. It was saving the house. But there was another habit my father-in-law never skipped, and he told me the bucket alone was only doing half the job. The next morning I found my father-in-law carrying that same bucket back upstairs. It was heavier than the day before. He set it on the workbench, took the lid off, and pointed inside. Nearly an inch of water had collected in the bottom. He smiled. That sentence stuck with me. Most people never see the moisture they're fighting. They only see what the moisture leaves behind. A stained ceiling, a warped shelf, rust on old tools, a musty smell that never quite goes away. By then the damage has already started. My father-in-law believed the smartest repair was the one you never had to make. That's why he never relied on one solution. The bucket was only one layer. At first I didn't understand what he meant. Then he walked over to one of the basement windows. It was closed, locked. Everything looked normal. He unlocked it and opened it just a few inches. Fresh air drifted into the room. That afternoon we opened every basement window for about half an hour. Not all day, just long enough to exchange the stale air for fresh air. Then we closed everything again. The bucket stayed. The airflow helped. Two small habits working together. That became another lesson. Old Amish solutions almost always work in layers. Rarely does one thing solve everything. The bucket helped remove moisture. Fresh air helped replace damp air. Then he showed me something I had walked past dozens of times without noticing. The downspout outside the basement wall. Instead of carrying rainwater away from the house, it emptied only a foot from the foundation. Every rainstorm soaked the soil beside the basement. The ground stayed wet. The walls stayed damp. The basement stayed humid. He moved the extension farther away from the house. 5 minutes of work, no electricity, no expensive equipment, just redirecting the water. I laughed because it sounded obvious once he said it, but I had never thought about it. That happened a lot around him. He never seemed smarter than everyone else. He simply noticed connections other people ignored. One problem often created another. Stop the first problem and the second one never appears. That was how he approached almost everything. The next thing he checked surprised me even more. Shelves. Not the wood itself. The boxes sitting against the wall. Every cardboard box had been pulled forward a few inches. I asked why. He said air can't dry what it can't reach. Those few inches allowed air to move behind the shelves. The walls stayed drier. The boxes stayed drier. The smell slowly disappeared. Again, another tiny habit. Another invisible improvement. One afternoon I asked him why he never bought a powered dehumidifier. He smiled. That answer surprised me. People often assume the Amish reject every modern tool. My father-in-law didn't think that way. He believed in using the simplest solution that solved the problem. If a bucket handled the moisture in a small storage room, why buy a machine? If the basement stayed damp because rainwater collected beside the foundation, why buy a larger machine instead of moving the water? If opening a window for 30 minutes solved half the problem, why ignore fresh air? His thinking wasn't anti-technology. It was anti-waste. Don't spend electricity solving a problem that a little observation might solve first. That philosophy appeared everywhere in the house. Nothing dramatic, just thoughtful. Over time, I stopped seeing that bucket as a bucket. I started seeing it as a reminder. Pay attention early. Small problems rarely stay small. Moisture becomes mold. Dust becomes wear. Tiny leaks become expensive repairs. Most homeowners fight the result. My father-in-law fought the condition that created the result. That's a very different way of thinking. I ask different questions. Where is the moisture coming from? Does the room have airflow? Is water water collecting outside? Are boxes packed too tightly against the wall? Would a simple moisture absorber help in this space? Those questions usually solve more than any expensive gadget ever could. The older I get, the more I realize this lesson was never really about a bucket. The bucket simply gave me something I could see. The real lesson was learning to notice problems while they're still quiet, because quiet problems are usually the cheapest ones to solve. If you wait until mold appears, you've already missed the easiest solution. If you wait until the wood begins to warp, you've already paid part of the repair. If you wait until the smell fills the room, moisture has been winning for a long time. My father-in-law never waited. He watched for the beginning, not the ending. That's wisdom you don't learn from a machine. You learn it from paying attention. So the next time you walk into your basement, storage room, closet, or workshop, don't just ask yourself if it smells damp. Ask yourself why. Look around. Watch where the water goes after it rains. See if the room has fresh air. Look for the little things before they become expensive things. And if that room only needs a little help staying dry, a simple moisture absorber might be all it takes. Not because it's magic, because it quietly removes the moisture that mold has been waiting for. Years later, I finally understand exactly what he meant. Now I'm curious. What's the dampest room in your house? A basement? A garage? A closet? Or maybe a storage room you've almost forgotten about? Let me know in the comments. Sometimes the first step towards solving a problem is simply noticing it before it starts asking for your attention.